This tower has been leaning for centuries, and honestly, it looks like it should have crashed long ago. So why is Pisa's most famous monument still standing? When you stand beneath it, the lean feels wrong, almost unnatural. Your brain keeps expecting disaster, like the whole structure might suddenly come down. And here's the unbelievable part. The tower did not start leaning yesterday or last century. It has been leaning for more than 800 years. Even more shocking, the problem began while they were building it. The tower started sinking almost immediately before the structure was even finished. The real threat was never the tower itself, it was the ground underneath, soft, unstable soil that simply could not carry the weight. Imagine placing a massive stone tower on a foundation only about 3 meters deep, then expecting it to behave perfectly for centuries. That was mistake one. Then something strange happened. Construction stopped for years because of war, and unbelievably, that long delay may have been the very thing that saved it. Look closely and the tower is not just leaning, it is actually curved. That bend is a visible record of centuries of human attempts. By the 20th century, the lean had become so dangerous that experts feared the tower might finally collapse, not in theory, but within living memory. So the real mystery is bigger than a leaning tower. This is the story of how a construction failure somehow became one of history's survivors. To understand the tower, we have to step back into medieval Europe, when Pisa was not just a city, but one of the richest maritime powers. In the 11th century, Pisa controlled important trade routes across the Mediterranean, bringing enormous wealth into the city and transforming it into a rising European power. With wealth pouring into the city, Pisa's leaders wanted something powerful, a monument that would show the entire world just how successful the city had become. Their answer was an ambitious construction project, a massive cathedral complex that would include a cathedral, baptistry, cemetery, and a towering bell tower. At the time, building monumental religious architecture was also a statement of political power, wealth, and faith, something cities across Italy fiercely competed over. The tower itself was meant to serve a practical purpose. It would hold enormous bells that called people across the city to prayer. Construction of the bell tower officially began in 1173, and at first, everything appeared completely normal. Strong stone, skilled builders, and careful architectural planning. The first level rose successfully, and the second, and the project seems destined to become another beautiful monument in Pisa's growing architectural masterpiece. But as builders reached the third floor, something strange began happening beneath the structure, something no architect could see and no engineer could stop. Slowly, almost silently, the tower began sinking into the earth. What started as a proud symbol of Pisa was becoming a dangerous engineering problem. At first, the lean was almost impossible to notice. Only the builders working closest to the tower realized something about the structure felt slightly wrong. They began measuring the walls again and again, checking their tools, wondering if they had made mistakes. But the problem was not above them. Far below their feet, the ground was slowly collapsing. The tower sat on unstable layers of clay, sand, and underground water. The builders had unknowingly placed the tower on a foundation only 3 meters deep, far too shallow for such an enormous stone structure. As the ground compressed unevenly, one side of the tower began sinking faster than the other, causing the entire structure to tilt. For the builders, this was terrifying. Every new stone added more weight, pushing the tower deeper into the unstable ground. By the time the third floor was completed, the lean was undeniable. The tower was no longer vertical. The builders suddenly faced a frightening question. Should they continue building or stop the project before the entire structure collapsed? Eventually, the decision was made to stop construction completely. The project was abandoned, leaving the unfinished tower leaning dangerously over the city. At that moment, many people believed the tower's story was already over, a failed monument sinking slowly into the ground. For nearly a century, construction stopped completely. The unfinished tower stood silently beside the cathedral, leaning slightly but still stubbornly standing. The reason construction stopped had nothing to do with engineering. Pisa became involved in military conflicts with nearby cities across Italy. Resources that once funded architecture were redirected to war, leaving the tower abandoned for decades while the city focused on survival. Year after year passed, and something unexpected began happening beneath the tower while nobody was watching. The soil beneath the tower slowly compressed under its enormous weight, becoming denser and more stable with every passing year. Ironically, the long pause that looked like failure was actually stabilizing the ground. When construction finally resumed many decades later, the builders discovered something surprising. The tower had not collapsed. It was still leaning, but the ground beneath it had become stable enough to continue building. Instead of abandoning the tower forever, the builders made a bold decision. They continued building upward. What happened next would create one of the strangest architectural shapes in the world. At first glance, the tower simply looks tilted, but when you study its profile carefully, something strange appears. The tower is not straight. Instead of leaning like a rigid stick, the tower bends slightly as it rises, creating a shape that almost resembles a gentle banana. The reason for this curve lies in a clever medieval decision. Builders realized the tower was leaning, so they tried correcting the angle. They began building the upper floors slightly taller on one side, hoping the extra height would pull the tower back toward vertical. This technique created a subtle counterlean, pushing the tower slightly in the opposite direction of the original tilt. Instead of straightening the tower completely, the strategy produced something unusual, a structure that bends slightly along its height. Ironically, this imperfect correction may have helped stabilize the structure by redistributing weight across the tower. Despite the dramatic tilt, the tower's center of gravity still remained inside its base. As long as that invisible balance point stayed within the foundation, the tower could continue standing, even while leaning dramatically. But the story of the tower's survival was far from over. By the 20th century, the Leaning Tower of Pisa had become world famous. But beneath the admiration, engineers were becoming deeply worried. The tower was leaning more every year, slowly but steadily sinking deeper into the soft soil beneath its foundation. Scientists began carefully measuring the tower's movement, tracking every millimeter of tilt to understand whether the structure was still stable. By the late 20th century, the lean had reached over 5 degrees, pushing the tower dangerously close to the limits of structural stability. Some experts warned that without intervention, the tower might collapse within decades, ending its 800-year struggle against gravity. In 1990, the tower was officially closed to the public, marking the beginning of one of the most ambitious engineering rescue missions in history. Engineers from around the world gathered in Pisa, determined to find a solution that could save the tower without destroying its famous lean. One of the first strategies involved adding massive counterweights to the base, attempting to stabilize the structure while engineers planned a long-term solution. But the most surprising solution involved removing small amounts of soil from beneath the higher side of the tower. The plan sounded simple, but the risk was enormous. If engineers removed too much soil, the tower could collapse instantly. Saving the tower required a bold idea, not forcing the tower upright, but carefully adjusting the ground beneath it. Engineers began removing small amounts of soil from the higher side of the tower, allowing gravity to slowly pull the structure back toward balance. The process worked almost like adjusting a heavy object resting on soft ground. Every movement was carefully monitored, sometimes measuring changes as small as a single millimeter. The counterweights helped prevent sudden movement, while engineers slowly adjusted the soil underneath. Over time, more than 30 tons of soil were removed from beneath the tower. the tower's lean gradually reduced from over 5 degrees to just under 4 degrees. This adjustment made the tower significantly more stable while preserving its famous tilt. Engineers estimate the tower is now stable for at least 200 years. What began as an engineering mistake had turned into one of the most remarkable survival stories in architectural history. The secret to the tower's survival lies in a simple principle of physics called the center of gravity. As long as the tower's center of gravity stays above its base, the structure remains stable. The moment that invisible line moves outside the base, gravity wins and the structure falls. Fortunately, the Pisa Tower has a wide circular base, which helps keep the center of gravity within safe limits. The tower's weight spreads through the foundation and soil, distributing pressure across the ground instead of concentrating it in one dangerous point. Even though the lean looks dramatic, the tower is still balanced within the limits of physics. What appears dangerous to the human eye is actually a carefully balanced structure. For centuries, the tower leaned further and further, but never enough to push its center of gravity beyond the base. Today, the tower stands as both a scientific curiosity and one of the most recognizable monuments on Earth. What started as a construction failure became an engineering miracle that continues to fascinate the world. Over the centuries, the Leaning Tower of Pisa transformed from an embarrassing construction mistake into one of the most recognizable landmarks on Earth. Millions of visitors travel to Pisa every year just to witness the impossible sight of a massive marble tower leaning, yet somehow refusing to fall. For generations, the tower has fascinated travelers, artists, historians, and engineers who all ask the same simple question: how can a structure this heavy lean so dramatically and still remain standing after more than 8 centuries? Today, the tower is studied around the world as a real-life lesson in architecture, physics, and the unpredictable nature of engineering. Despite everything that went wrong during construction, the tower still performs its original role as a bell tower for the cathedral. What makes the tower truly remarkable is not just the lean, but the centuries of human ingenuity that kept it standing. A mistake in medieval construction unexpectedly created one of the most famous structures in human history. And perhaps that is the real lesson behind the tower's story. Sometimes history's greatest landmarks are not perfect creations, but imperfect structures that survive against all odds. If you enjoy real history that feels unreal, subscribe and like the video so you don't miss the next story. Thank you.